I caught her in the act. Not in some dramatic moment, not in some angry confrontation with shouting and broken glass. No, it was a subtle thing, a glance I wasn't supposed to see, a message that wasn't meant for my eyes. I found the message just sitting there like it was meant to be found. We were on vacation, me and Rebecca, at a small coastal resort. It was supposed to be a nice break, something to bring us back together, you know? A chance to remind ourselves of who we were before the grind of everyday life took over. But something felt wrong from the start. We checked into our room, and I could already feel the distance. It wasn't anything obvious. Not yet. Just a quiet tension hanging in the air between us. Rebecca was off, distracted, more than usual. She was the type to throw herself into whatever she was doing, but that day it was like she couldn't sit still. She kept checking her phone, fidgeting with her hair, avoiding my gaze like she was trying to keep some secret from me. I brushed it off, thinking it was nothing. I've never been one to overthink things. But when she announced she was going to the spa and left me to enjoy the afternoon alone, a cold feeling crept into my gut. At first, I tried to enjoy the view. I walked along the beach, thinking about all the projects I had waiting for me back home. But my mind kept drifting back to Rebecca. She'd been acting distant for a while, and I hadn't done anything about it. Maybe I didn't want to see it. Maybe I was too comfortable in the life we had built. But that nagging feeling wouldn't go away. By the time I walked back to the room, I found her on her phone again, her back turned to me as she typed away quickly. She didn't even notice me standing there. For a moment, I thought I should just leave it alone, enjoy the time we had left. But then, as I stood there, I caught a glimpse of the screen. Just enough to see a name, Carlos, and a text that read, "Can't wait to see you tonight." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The message was clear. She wasn't just distracted. She was distracted because she was already thinking about someone else. Now let me back up for a second. I'm Michael, 64 years old, a retired engineer. I spent my entire career fixing problems, making things run smoother, faster, and more efficiently. It's what I do. My world was built on precision, on understanding how things work, on solving the puzzles others couldn't. I like things to be steady, predictable, and that was my life up until now. With Rebecca, we've been married for 12 years. 12 years of Sunday mornings at the diner, quiet nights watching TV, and small trips to the mountains or the beach when we needed to get away. It wasn't glamorous, but it was enough. I didn't ask for much. Rebecca, though, she liked the excitement. She wanted more, and I guess I never quite kept up. She was the one who pushed for the vacations, the dinners out, the late nights with friends. At first, I admired her energy, but after a while, I noticed something I didn't like. She was always looking for something new, something different. I'd see her eyes wander when we'd be at dinner, scanning the room, as if she was waiting for something or someone. I could deal with it. I didn't want to be the jealous type, especially when she'd tell me it was all in my head. But after that night, after seeing Carlos' name on her screen, something inside me snapped. She was never the one for transparency, but she'd always said, "You can trust me." Over the years, I tried to ignore the little things. Her strange phone habits, her long lunches with friends I'd never met, the odd trips she'd take for work or personal development. But this was different. As I stood there in the hotel room, staring at the back of Rebecca's head, I felt like I was looking at a stranger. I asked her about Carlos that evening, casually, as if I didn't know what I had seen. But when she turned to me, her face went pale. She stuttered out some excuse about a colleague who had been helping her with a project. But I could see the panic in her eyes, and I wasn't about to let her lie to me. "Is that why you've been acting so distant lately?" I asked, my voice low but sharp. Her response was a laugh, a nervous, shaky laugh. "You're overthinking it." "Really, Michael, it's nothing." I didn't believe her. I didn't trust her. Not anymore. But I knew if I confronted her, if I blew up in that moment, I wouldn't get the answers I needed. So I kept my cool for now. But I couldn't ignore what I'd just learned. I didn't know if it was just one man or if there were more. But I wasn't going to wait around like a fool. I had to figure out what was going on, and I wasn't going to do it by just asking her. I decided to play it smart. The next day, while she was out at the spa again, I stayed behind. I wasn't about to waste my time wandering aimlessly on the beach anymore. I started snooping around the room, checking her things, flipping through her bags. I found a receipt tucked away in the back of her purse from a hotel in the city. One I had never heard of. That's when it hit me. I wasn't wrong. Something was going on. And it wasn't just a harmless flirtation. Rebecca was playing me. I'm not the type to let things slide. I don't tolerate lies. And Rebecca was about to learn that the hard way. The next morning, after the awkward exchange the night before, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was living in some twisted version of a mystery novel. Rebecca was acting like everything was normal, like I hadn't just caught her red-handed flirting with someone else. But I wasn't fooled. Not anymore. I had to figure out exactly what was going on, and I wasn't going to wait around for her to slip up again. I knew I had to stay calm. I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of seeing me rattled. But inside, my mind was spinning with questions. Who was Carlos? How long had this been going on? Was it just him, or was there more? The first thing I did that morning was take a closer look at Rebecca's phone. I had never been the type of guy to snoop. Privacy was important to me. But things had changed. She'd crossed the line, and now I had the right to find out exactly what I was dealing with. When she stepped out of the room to grab coffee, I didn't waste a second. I grabbed her phone from where she'd left it on the bedside table. Her screen was locked, but I'd seen her input her passcode a few times over the last few days. It was a simple 4-digit code. I didn't need to break into her phone. I just needed to wait for the right moment. The screen opened up, and I immediately went to her messages. The first thing that caught my eye was the thread with Carlos. I didn't need to scroll very far to see the messages between them. I can't wait to see you tonight. It was the same message I had seen yesterday. But now, there were more. I miss you. Can't stop thinking about you. Last night was amazing. I'm glad you made the trip. Let's make it happen again soon. I felt my blood boil, but I kept my hands steady. My suspicions were confirmed. She wasn't just texting a coworker or a friend. This wasn't some innocent work trip situation. There was something physical between them, something that had been going on for a while. The messages didn't stop there. The next one made it clear they had been meeting in secret for weeks. I'll tell him it was a work trip. He'll never suspect anything. I can't wait to feel you again. The final message was a picture I didn't need to see. Rebecca, in the bed of a hotel room, her body leaning toward Carlos, a smile on her face that was not meant for me. The picture was taken just a few days ago. It was real. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a betrayal. I felt the air in the room thicken. My first instinct was to storm out of that hotel room, confront her, shout in her face. But I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. I needed more. I needed more evidence. I needed to take control of the situation. I carefully put her phone back, exactly how I'd found it. I couldn't let her know I'd been snooping. I had to stay one step ahead. I spent the next few hours thinking, plotting. If Rebecca thought she could lie her way out of this, she was sorely mistaken. I wasn't just going to confront her in some messy, emotional outburst. That wouldn't get me the answers I needed. No, I needed to approach this with a plan, with patience. The first thing I had to do was track Carlos down. I didn't know where he was, but I knew he was a part of the puzzle now. He had to be. I'd seen his name enough times in those messages to understand that he wasn't just some random fling. This was a full-on affair. So I did what any engineer would do. I used the tools I had available. I did some research. I checked the message history again. In one of the texts, Carlos had mentioned his work address. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I found the company he worked for, a small but well-known logistics firm in the city. I couldn't just show up there. No, I needed to be strategic about this. I wasn't some hot-headed fool who was going to make a scene, but I had enough information now to start piecing things together. I began to make plans for how I would confront Carlos. I wasn't going to let this go, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that confronting him directly wouldn't be the only thing I needed to do. I needed to confront Rebecca too, but not yet. Not until I had everything I needed to take control. The next day, after Rebecca had gone to the spa again, I took a trip to the company where Carlos worked. I wasn't about to tell him who I was right off the bat. I walked into the building, posing as someone looking for work, a potential client. I made sure to keep things casual. I asked questions, got a feel for the place. I learned what I needed to know quickly. Carlos wasn't just some low-level employee. He was a supervisor, someone who held some sway in the company. I also found out where he lived, what his schedule was. He was, in fact, working the same hours as Rebecca had mentioned in her texts. On the same days she'd been out with friends or working late. I made sure to stay calm through all of this. I didn't need to raise any suspicion. When I finally returned to the hotel room, I wasn't ready to spill everything just yet. No, I needed to let Rebecca's actions catch up with her. So, when she walked through the door, all fresh from her little spa trip, I acted like nothing was wrong. She gave me a smile, a little too bright. I could see the guilt hiding behind her eyes, but I wasn't going to let her off the hook so easily. "Good trip?" I asked, as if nothing had changed. She smiled, but her eyes darted to her phone. She checked it again, then set it down quickly. A nervous gesture I'd seen before. "Yeah, it was fine," she replied, sitting down next to me on the bed. She was trying too hard to appear nonchalant. I waited. I didn't rush to make any accusations. I just let the silence sit. Finally, after a few minutes, she couldn't stand it anymore. "Why are you looking at me like that?" she asked, her voice a little shaky. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I picked up my phone and pulled up the messages. Slowly, I scrolled through the screen, making sure she saw what I was doing. "Michael, what are you doing?" she asked, her voice trembling. I could see the panic rising in her eyes. I didn't respond. I handed her the phone. I didn't need to say anything else. Her face went pale when she saw the texts, the pictures. She swallowed hard, but I could see the lie in her eyes as she opened her mouth. "Michael, I cut her off. Don't say anything. I don't want to hear it." She tried to explain, but the words didn't matter. The damage had been done. She could lie and explain all she wanted, but the truth was there, plain as day, right in front of her. "You've been seeing him for months, haven't you?" I asked, my voice low and steady, despite the rage building inside me. "You've been lying to my face, acting like everything was fine. And all this time, you've been sneaking around with him." Her eyes filled with tears now, but they didn't mean anything to me. I wasn't falling for it. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, her voice breaking. "I never wanted to hurt you, but it just happened. Spare me the excuses," I said, standing up. "I'm done listening to your lies." Rebecca's face was ghostly pale as she stared at the phone in my hands, the truth laid out before her like an open wound. I could almost hear her thinking of every lie she could spin in the next few seconds. Her eyes darted between me and the phone, her breath shaky as she swallowed hard. I didn't care about her excuses anymore. The image of her, my wife, the woman I had trusted, was shattered. I'd watched her smile, laughed with her, believed in the life we'd built together. And now it felt like it was all just a mask. "You've been seeing him, haven't you?" I said it again, more calmly this time, like I was talking to a stranger. There was no heat in my voice, just cold disbelief. Rebecca started to speak but faltered, her words stumbling over themselves. She couldn't look me in the eyes. "It's not like you think." I cut her off before she could finish the sentence. "Don't bother, Rebecca. I'm not here for excuses." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, and then looked up at me, trying to hold my gaze. There was a mix of guilt and desperation in her eyes. "Michael, please. I know what you're thinking, but this isn't how it seems. Then explain it to me." My voice was steely now, the flood of anger that had been simmering beneath the surface finally surfacing. I was no longer the patient husband. This was a man who had been deceived for months, and now I had the truth. "I didn't mean to fall for him," Rebecca said. She said it like it was a revelation, like she was speaking of some accident. "It just happened." She stopped, pressing her lips together like she was afraid of saying the wrong thing. But I wasn't interested in hearing her feelings. "What, you just accidentally fell into bed with him? You didn't mean to?" I stood up from the bed, pacing. I couldn't sit still anymore. "How many times, Rebecca? How long has this been going on?" Her silence answered my question before she could. She couldn't even look at me as she spoke. "It's not just Carlos," she whispered. "There was someone before him, too. I didn't mean for it to happen. I felt like I was losing myself. Everything between us felt like it was stuck." I stopped pacing and looked at her. For a moment, I wasn't sure if I was angry or disgusted. The weight of the betrayal had started to hit me fully. "So this was my fault, huh?" I said. "I wasn't good enough for you, so you had to go searching for someone else? And now it's my problem?" "No, that's not it. Michael, please. Don't you dare try to make me the villain in this story. I snapped, my voice raising despite myself. You're the one who chose to betray me, Rebecca. You're the one who couldn't respect the vows we made. You're the one who thought lying to my face every day was okay. She looked stricken, her face crumbling under the weight of her guilt. I didn't want to hurt you, she said, her voice breaking. You didn't want to hurt me? Then why did you do it? I shook my head in disbelief. You don't get to play the victim here. She looked at me with wide, desperate eyes. I never wanted to lose you. I swear I didn't. But I've been so lost, Michael. I've been trying to find myself again. It was just supposed to be one night, one mistake. Save it. I interrupted. Just stop. This has been going on for months, hasn't it? More than just one night. More than one mistake. Don't insult my intelligence. You think I'm just going to sit here and listen to your pathetic excuses? Her voice dropped to a whisper. I was so lonely, Michael. You don't understand. I wasn't sure whether I wanted to punch something or scream. I had no sympathy left. For the first time, I saw her for what she really was, a liar. A woman who couldn't see the damage she was doing to everything we'd built. But I wasn't going to let her off easy. I wasn't going to fall into the trap of forgiving her, just because she shed a few tears. The man I was now wasn't the same man who would have embraced her and told her everything would be okay. I do understand, I said, my voice dropping low again. I understand perfectly. You chose to lie. You chose to betray me. And now you're asking me to understand your pain? I'm done understanding. I'm done playing the nice guy. You've shown me who you really are. Rebecca's lip trembled as she finally looked up, her eyes filled with the full weight of what she had done. But I wasn't interested in looking at her anymore. I wasn't interested in hearing what she had to say. I'm done with this, I said, turning away from her. You don't get to control the narrative anymore. Not after everything you've done. The conversation left me feeling cold and empty, like I just cut a dead weight from my life. But I wasn't going to just walk away from this like some fool. I'd worked too hard to build a life with her. I had every right to demand justice. But what was I going to do now? I couldn't just sit here and wallow in anger. That wasn't who I was. I thought about what had come next. What was really going to make her understand that this wasn't just some petty disagreement between a married couple. This was about respect. This was about loyalty. And this was about taking control of my own future. I spent the next couple of days thinking about how I could get the closure I needed. The kind of closure where she understood that what she had done wasn't just going to slide away. Where she would be forced to face the consequences. And, most importantly, where I would make sure Carlos wasn't walking away and scathed either. I'd already gotten all the evidence I needed to confront him, but I wasn't going to give him a free pass. He wasn't just some random guy. He was part of the problem. He'd knowingly involved himself with a married woman. He was a liar, too. I decided I would confront Carlos, face to face, without any warnings. I wasn't going to call him or send him an email. I was going to make sure he saw me, so he could understand that this wasn't some petty drama. This was a man who'd been wronged, and I wasn't going to let it slide. But before I could go after him, I had to deal with Rebecca. The first step was to hit her where it hurt the most, her own reputation. I wasn't going to make this easy for her. I'd already made up my mind about the divorce, but I needed to take control of the situation. I wasn't going to let her walk away from this unscathed. I started making calls, talking to some of her friends. I wasn't going to let Rebecca keep her little secret from her inner circle. She had done this behind my back, and now she was going to face the consequences of her actions from every angle. I'd make sure the people who needed to know did. Let her deal with the fallout from her choices. By the time I was ready to execute my plan, I had everything in place. The pieces were falling together, and Rebecca had no idea what was coming. She thought I'd sit back and accept her apologies, that I'd let her lie her way out of this. But I had different plans. The first thing I did was organize a meeting with her closest friends, a small dinner gathering. I wasn't going to give her the chance to spin her story any longer. It was time to take the truth public. I called a few of her closest friends and told them everything. I didn't mince words. I didn't care if it hurt her feelings. They needed to know what kind of person she had become. I wasn't going to let her protect her image at my expense. I planned it carefully. I wanted it to happen in front of people who would see the true Rebecca. The one who had lied, who had cheated. The one who thought she could get away with it. I was going to take my life back. and make sure she understood the cost of her betrayal. The evening of the dinner gathering arrived with a sharpness I hadn't expected. I thought I would feel more nervous, maybe a little uneasy, but as I stood in front of the mirror fixing my tie, I felt something else entirely: empowerment. The man who had been blind to his wife's betrayals was gone. In his place stood a man who had seen the truth and was now taking control of his own fate. Rebecca, on the other hand, was completely unaware of what was coming. She thought that by apologizing and begging for forgiveness, she could somehow patch things up between us. But I wasn't interested in hearing her plea for mercy. I had a plan in mind, one that would change everything. The dinner was set at a small, upscale restaurant that Rebecca loved. It was one of those places where the food was good, but the real draw was the reputation. Fancy enough to feel special, but not so extravagant as to make it obvious when you were trying to impress someone. I knew she'd enjoy the setting. I knew she'd think it was just another night out with friends, another chance to show off how charming she was. As she and I walked in, she smiled and greeted the people at the table. There were a few close friends, Sarah, Jessica, and a couple of other women who she'd always kept close. At first, everything seemed normal. Rebecca was acting like her usual self, charming, laughing, and talking about everything and nothing. She didn't suspect a thing. We settled into our seats, and Rebecca looked at me across the table. "Michael, I'm really glad you agreed to come tonight. We've all missed you." I nodded, but my mind wasn't on her words. I had already gone over what I was going to do. The pieces were in place. The first domino was about to fall. "Yeah, it's good to catch up," I said. "Though I have to admit, I've been feeling a little out of the loop lately." I glanced at the others at the table. They didn't seem to catch the subtle edge in my tone. Rebecca laughed, as if to brush off my words. "Oh, you're always so dramatic, Michael." I smiled at her, but the smile was cold. "You think so? Maybe I'm just catching up on everything you've been hiding from me." Her smile faltered for just a second. The women around the table didn't seem to notice, but I saw it. I saw the guilt flash across her face, the realization that she had underestimated me. That was all I needed. I continued on with my plan. "We've been through a lot these past few weeks, haven't we?" I said, casually leaning back in my chair. "But I'm not here to air all our dirty laundry. I just think there's something everyone should know." Rebecca's eyes darted around the table, her calm demeanor slipping for a moment. The air around us shifted. I could feel the tension build, but I wasn't going to back down now. One of her friends, Sarah, picked up on the change. "Michael, what's going on? You're being kind of cryptic." I smiled again, but it wasn't the kind of smile anyone would want to see. "I just think it's time Rebecca stopped hiding things from the people who care about her." Rebecca's eyes went wide. Her face flushed with panic, but she quickly tried to regain control of the situation. "Michael, stop. What are you doing?" I raised a hand to quiet her. "I think you all deserve to know what's really been going on behind closed doors. You see, my wife's been having an affair. A long one. With someone I never would have imagined. Someone you all might know." The room went completely still. I glanced around, watching as the truth sank in. The looks of disbelief, the widening eyes. Sarah, Jessica, and the others exchanged quick glances, unsure of how to respond. Rebecca was stunned. Her face drained of color as she tried to compose herself. "That's not," she stumbled, but I wasn't interested in her excuses. "You know, Rebecca," I said, leaning forward now, "I always thought I could trust you. But what I didn't realize was how deep your lies went. You didn't just lie to me. You lied to all of them." Rebecca's eyes were on fire now, filled with something between rage and panic. "You have no idea what you're talking about, Michael," she said, her voice shaking. "You're just angry. This isn't how it seems." I turned to Sarah and the others, who were sitting there stunned. "You might want to ask her about Carlos. Or maybe about the last time they were together. It wasn't at some hotel. It wasn't even a quick fling. She was so confident in her lies that she thought no one would ever know." Rebecca's face twisted into something resembling fear. She shot me a look, one that was begging for me to stop, but I wasn't going to let her off the hook now. Not after everything she'd done. "I don't want to hear about this," Sarah said, her voice a little too calm. "This isn't the place for this kind of conversation." But I wasn't done. "I'm not going to let her sweep this under the rug, Sarah. You all deserve to know what kind of person she is. I'm not the only one she's been lying to. The truth finally started to settle in, and Rebecca's friends were looking at her differently. She could no longer maintain the facade of the innocent, perfect wife. Her betrayal had been laid bare, and there was no way for her to spin it anymore. She stood up suddenly, knocking over a glass of wine. "I'm not doing this here," she hissed, her voice low but full of venom. "Michael, you are cruel. You have no right to do this." But I didn't care about what she thought. The tables had turned, and I was in control now. I'd exposed her for what she truly was, and I wasn't about to apologize for it. "I've done nothing but stand by you, Rebecca. I supported you. I put my faith in you. And this is how you repay me? With lies and betrayal." The women were quiet now, and I could see the judgment in their eyes. It was like a collective realization. They had all been fooled, and it was Rebecca's fault. I turned my attention to the waiter who had come over to check on us, clearly unaware of the storm brewing. "The check, please," I said coldly. "We're done here." Rebecca's shoulders slumped, but she still wasn't willing to face what she had done. I knew her too well by now. She was going to keep fighting, keep denying it, but it didn't matter. I had already taken back the power in this relationship, and it wasn't going to end until I had everything I needed. Later that evening, I stood outside the restaurant, watching as Rebecca stormed to the car. She had made a scene, tried to explain herself, but I had already made my decision. The next part of my plan wasn't about her anymore. It was about Carlos. I had tracked down his information, piecing things together from what I knew about him. He was nothing special, just another man who had let his pride cloud his judgment. He wasn't some heroic lover or romantic knight in shining armor. No, Carlos was a coward, a man who thought he could take what wasn't his and walk away without facing the consequences. I had already made the call. Carlos was going to face me. The next day, I showed up at his workplace. He worked at some tech firm, a company that made good money but had no interest in people who weren't in their inner circle. I didn't call ahead. I didn't want to give him a chance to prepare. I wanted him to see me, to feel the weight of what he had done. I walked into the building, my shoes clicking on the polished floor, and I asked for him at the reception desk. The receptionist didn't seem to recognize the urgency in my tone, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to leave without confronting him. When Carlos saw me standing in the doorway of his office, his face went pale. He didn't even try to deny who I was. He knew exactly who I was, and he knew exactly what I had come to do. He swallowed hard, standing up from his desk. "You've got some nerve," I said, walking into his office without asking permission. "You really thought you could just walk in and out of my life without consequences?" Carlos opened his mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. He was scared. I could see it in his eyes, and I didn't care. "Do you think she loves you?" I asked, my voice low and calm. "You think she'll leave me for you? You're just another fool." Carlos was shaking now. I wasn't looking for an apology. I was looking for him to understand one simple thing. There were consequences for his actions. There would be no escape. "I'm not here to fight you," I said, turning toward the door. "I'm here to make sure you know what happens when you cross a man like me." I left his office without another word, knowing I had made my point. The next few days were a blur of calculated actions. Rebecca tried to smooth things over with me, offering apologies that didn't carry the weight of sincerity, promising that she would change, that she would do better. But I had already seen the truth. The false promises, the desperate pleas, they no longer held any power over me. I had moved beyond the stage of trying to save a marriage built on lies. The phone calls, the texts, the endless explanations. Rebecca thought that somehow, if she just kept apologizing and begging, I would return to the man I had been. But I wasn't that man anymore. I was something else, something more focused, more deliberate. And I wasn't interested in forgiveness. It was a Friday when I took the next step. It had been over a week since the dinner at the restaurant. Rebecca had tried to act as if things were normal, but the tension was palpable. Every conversation, every glance, every quiet moment between us felt like a heavy weight. I knew she was on edge, constantly watching my every move, waiting for me to finally break. But that wasn't going to happen. I'd already made my decision. It was time to take this to the next level. I wasn't going to just leave her in silence. I wasn't going to walk away quietly and let her slip back into her routine. No, I was going to ensure that Rebecca understood the full impact of her betrayal. And Carlos was going to be the first to learn what it meant to mess with me. I'd already arranged a meeting with Carlos earlier in the week. I had done my homework, found out where he liked to hang out, where he went after work, who he associated with. By the time I showed up at the dive bar he frequented, I knew exactly what to expect. The bar was dimly lit, the kind of place where people went to escape. The kind of place where secrets were traded like currency. Carlos was sitting at the far end of the bar, nursing a drink and chatting with some strangers who had no idea who he was. He didn't see me at first. I let the moment hang in the air, just for a second, watching him. He thought he was untouchable, that he was immune from consequences. And I was about to prove him wrong. I walked up to the bar, the sound of my boots clicking on the wood floor. I didn't waste any time. "Carlos," I said, my voice cutting through the noise of the bar. He turned, his face going pale when he saw me standing there. There was a flicker of recognition, but he didn't make a move. He didn't even try to deny who I was. He knew exactly who I was. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice tight. I didn't sit down. I didn't need to. "I want you to understand the gravity of what you've done." Carlos shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His eyes darted around the room, as if looking for an escape, but there was nowhere to go. "I don't know what you're talking about." I smiled, a cold, almost predatory smile. "You really think I didn't know? You really think you could sleep with my wife, and I wouldn't find out?" He looked down at his drink, his fingers twitching nervously around the glass. "Look, man, I didn't mean for it to get so complicated. It was just a one-time thing." I leaned in, my voice low but firm. "A one-time thing? You've been sneaking around with her for months, Carlos, and now you're going to have to face the consequences of your actions." His face flushed. "Listen, No, you listen," I interrupted, my voice now full of authority. "You think you can just walk away from this? That you can come into my life, steal what's mine, and just walk away like nothing happened?" I leaned closer. "No one gets to do that. Not to me." Carlos stammered, but I wasn't interested in his excuses. I didn't need to hear him beg for mercy. I already knew what I had to do, what I was going to do. I stood up straight and looked at him one last time. "You'll stay away from Rebecca, Carlos. If you know what's good for you, you'll never speak to her again. And if I catch you doing anything behind my back again, I will ruin your life." Carlos didn't respond. He didn't have to. He knew I meant every word. I wasn't playing games. By the time I returned home, it was already late. I had taken care of things with Carlos, made sure he knew his place. Now it was time to deal with Rebecca. She was waiting for me, sitting on the couch in the dimly lit living room. Her eyes were red, and she had clearly been crying, but there was something more in her expression, a sense of desperation. She knew what was coming. "I'm sorry, Michael," she said as soon as I stepped through the door. Her voice cracked. "I know I've messed up. I just need you to forgive me." I didn't respond immediately. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a drink, and took my time. I wasn't going to let her dictate the pace of this conversation. When I turned back to her, I saw the familiar face of the woman who had betrayed me. She still didn't get it. She still thought she could win me back with a few tears and some empty words. "You're sorry?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "Do you really think that matters now? Do you honestly believe that an apology is going to fix this?" Her face crumpled. "I don't know what else to say. I don't want to lose you, Michael." I let out a bitter laugh. "You already lost me, Rebecca. You just don't realize it yet. What we had, it's gone. And nothing you say is going to change that." Rebecca stood up, reaching out for me. "Please, Michael, let's go to therapy. Let's work this out. We can fix this. We can still—" "No," I said, cutting her off sharply. "I'm done. There's no fixing this. I'm not the same person I was before all of this happened." She took a step back, looking at me with wide eyes, as though she couldn't believe what she was hearing. You can't be serious. You're really just going to walk away?" I nodded slowly. "I'm done." Rebecca collapsed back onto the couch, her face a mixture of shock and disbelief. "You can't just leave me like this. You owe me more than that. We've been through so much together." "Not anymore," I said coldly. "Not after what you've done. You've taken everything I gave you, and now it's over. No more second chances." It wasn't long after that the paperwork arrived. The divorce papers. It was the inevitable next step. I didn't want to waste any more time. I had already made up my mind, and there was no going back. Rebecca, of course, tried everything she could to change my mind. She begged. She cried. She tried to play the victim, as if I were the one who had wronged her. But none of it worked. By the time I handed her the papers, there was nothing left between us. No love, no trust, just the cold, hard reality of what had happened. And that was when I realized I wasn't the man I used to be. I wasn't the guy who would put up with betrayal, with lies. I was something stronger now, more resilient, and I knew I could rebuild my life, step by step, without her in it. The divorce was final. My life began to settle into a new rhythm. There were days when it felt like the weight of everything had been lifted off my shoulders. The silence in the house wasn't oppressive anymore. It was freeing. I didn't need to apologize for taking control of my life. I didn't need to explain myself to anyone. What I had done wasn't about vengeance. It was about taking back what was mine. My dignity, my self-respect, and my peace of mind. And as for Rebecca, well, she got exactly what she deserved.